Welcome to Series 2 of The Core with Nathan Fowkes, hosted by Chiu. Nathan Fowkes has been one of the top concept artists in the entertainment industry for over 20 years. His credits include The Prince of Egypt, How to Train Your Dragon, and Wonder Park. In this mini-series, Nathan will get to the core of concepts and ideas that he teaches in his schoolism classes. We hope you enjoy it.
Hey Nathan, thank you so much for your time. I want to ask you about limited color palettes. I was looking at your landscape sketching in watercolor and gouache, and that is one of the practices that you ask your artists to do. Would you advise using a limited color palette when an artist is first learning, and why? I'd love for you to explain that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not that, you must always use a limited amount of paints. I think everyone's aware of the idea that you don't necessarily want to go out with every single possible color, especially on your first outing. For obvious reasons, you'll get lost in all of the choices, right? So if you limit your choices, then the difficulties, going through that learning curve, you'll be in a better position to not get bogged down in all the choices. So for that reason, it's excellent to use a limited palette. And I would recommend something that centers around what are kind of traditionally thought of as the primary colors, because if you have a red, a yellow, a blue, and a green, you can pretty much get everything that you need. Now, if those are extremely saturated colors, those are hard to control. And that's why in my class I recommend something like Venetian red. It's a brown red. You can, it feels natural. You can control it. And a sap green. It's a nice warm green that feels very much like foliage without being hyper-saturated like some other pigments might be. Maybe use yellow ochre at first, kind of a browned yellow, instead of a really extreme yellow. And what you find is those colors are easier to control, and so you'll get better results with less pain and suffering. But what you also find is that the beauty of nature is so much in the subtleties. Nature is very neutral. Sure, there's all kinds of contrasts. There's the occasional flower or mineral that are hypersaturated, but most everything else is not saturated in nature. Even the greens of foliage often are a muted tone. You might get kind of backlit foliage that has a brilliant green translucency, but that's limited. And so you start to realize that the beauty in nature is actually the wide variety of gray and brown. So I've come across this. I've come across this all the time. I'm thinking of an occasion when I brought the wrong blue. I thought I had put one blue in my palette, and I brought the wrong blue. I think it was Prussian blue, which was a greenish blue. And I did. I had kind of a limited palette, kind of an on-the-go. And so I went out there and I had this Prussian blue, which just leans towards green, and I'd meant to bring ultramarine, which leans a little towards purple. And so I had these paintings that were just way too green. And it was killing me. I didn't have the paints to get the colors that I thought I needed. So you always take your limitations and try and turn them to your advantage. Even in real life, I think that's the case. And so what I realized was, in this scene, there really were some greens. There were little bits of grasses growing up out of the ground. And so I had earth and bark and browns that were all kind of turning greenish on me as I mixed my blues and my Venetian red together. And so what I realized was, if that is too green, if I have these gray greens that are inappropriate, if I have accents of a more saturated green, then by contrast, those other areas feel less green. And so I emphasize these little things that really existed on the location, little accents and little pops of green. I even made kind of a rhythm that kind of had a flow to how they fell across the landscape. And wouldn't you know it, wherever I put those accents, the yucky green that I was being challenged by started to feel a little bit warm and reddish as a contrast to the green. And all of a sudden, that painting fell into place. And that's how the best limited palettes work. An expert painter doesn't just understand what the pigments are, they understand how the pigments relate to each other. You put something down and it influences how the color next to it feels. And so what you learn is you have a limited palette and you tweak the colors that are side by side to make the neutral reds feel more red and the neutral greens to feel more green. And all of a sudden, the brilliant richness of nature pops, and it is magical. It is, it is a jewel that will shine if you learn to polish it right. If you don't understand to take those neutrals and make each one of them glow in contrast to that contrasting neutral next to it, you'll reach for saturated colors. You'll do, oh, I need a red, so you'll put a red. Oh, I need a green, so I'll put a green. You'll have this loud, saturated, garish, and then you feel like, oh, but it's red and it's green. Why does my painting look so horrible? Because the colors are influencing each other to an extreme. The subtlety of a limited palette helps you learn how to get these neutrals in nature to relate to each other properly and get that shimmering iridescence that will just lure your audience in, and they will feel the richness of nature when they see your painting.
I love it. Would we be able to ask you to kind of give the viewers a very defined assignment if they are unable to kind of take your class on schoolism?
Yeah, so well, the big limitation, because I even remember the painting that I'm thinking of that I was describing, there were mosquitoes in the mix. I had to come up with a solution fast. I was in nature, sometimes you're under attack by the elements, and sometimes you're under attack by nature itself. And so when you go outside, time and conditions are a limited palette, so to speak. You learn to make useful shortcuts because of the limited palette or the limitations of time. So you've got to get outside and deal with those challenges. But how about we do this? Start with a very simple exercise that you can do in your studio. You don't even have to go outside. Pick 3 contrasting colors. Just you have your paints and pick 3 colors that are different from each other. And just do a little abstract painting, however big you want, not too big so you're not fighting the whole board, maybe just a little rectangle. And see if you can get those 3 colors, just mix them together, maybe use white, 3 colors plus white, and blend them and mix them together in a way where they feel like they look good together. You don't have to have don't worry about any color theory, just experiment. What relationships of those colors look garish and they don't belong, and how do they mix together where they feel like they strengthen each other rather than weaken each other? That's something that I did early on in my career. I didn't have any free time. I was working 10, 12 hours a day plus other responsibilities. And I wanted to practice every day, didn't have the energy or time to do it. And that was my last resort. I'd go home, I'd have my palette, and then I'd do that little exercise. All I had the strength for was to do these little thumbnails and try and find ways to make these colors feel right together. And a lot of my kind of muscle memory, gut reaction, color theory came out of that practice. And then when you go out into nature and you have that challenge, take that lesson with you. You see a red, are you going to just put a saturated red down? Or look again. Is it really a neutral red that has something that's maybe cool or neutral or green next to it? And that neutral red feels like it pops. Go outside and look for those subtle relationships and approach your painting that way. And I think you might be surprised at the results.
I'm already looking at stuff around my room and thinking, okay, what things truly pop here? What things should I really pop out? And it's actually not that many. So that's a really great challenge for everybody. And of course, if you want to learn more, definitely check out Nathan Fowkes' class on schoolism.com, landscape sketching in watercolor and gouache. Thank you, Nathan.